Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you've ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. Since 2009, our radio program hosted guest experts from around the globe sharing their perspectives, experiences, and expertise while giving you food for thought. If you can't listen live, then download and listen to any of our 300-plus podcasts in our library at texasconflictcoach.com. So sit back, relax, or join the conversation every Tuesday evening, or tweet us at TXConflictCoach.
Hi, this is Zena Zunetta, your guest host. Our program today is The Language of Conflict. Our guest is Ken Cloke, renowned for his decades of work, passion, and dedication to bring peacemaking tools to wherever he believes he can be of service, whether it is in the U.S. or around the world. Ken will share his personal journey into conflict resolution and peacemaking and what keeps him here in the field. He will also share his philosophy of peacemaking and what he believes can bring us closest to peace. His global work, research, and teachings led Ken to write numerous books, including his most recent, The Dance of Opposites, which explores a new vision for conflict resolution and the use of language in conflict. Listeners will get an opportunity to think about how they might change their own language of conflict. Ken is a mediator, arbitrator, coach, consultant, and trainer, specializing in resolving complex multi-party disputes, including marital, divorce, family grievance, and workplace disputes, collective bargaining, organizational, public policy, and school conflicts, and designing preventative conflict resolution systems. He's worked in over 20 countries and is founder and first president of Mediators Beyond Borders. He has published 11 books, and most recently The Dance of Opposites, Explorations in Mediation, Dialogue, and Conflict Resolution Systems Design. Welcome to the program, Ken.
Thank you, Zena. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It's lovely to be here with you. So, Ken, you've been in the business of conflict resolution and peacemaking for decades. What got you into the field, and what keeps you in it?
What got me into the field actually came from three different sources. The first was that I was working as a judge and knew that I was supposed to do justice, but I wasn't sure exactly what that was or how you got there. And I was frustrated at the way that the legal system operated and prevented conversations from taking place, especially where emotions were involved. And there were a number of cases where it just was clear that the law was not going to be an adequate way of solving the problem. The second was that I went through my own very awful divorce and experienced firsthand what happens to people who go through the legal system, and saw how counterproductive and even destructive it was for children. And the third was a little bizarre. I was selected to be the first judge on People's Court.
Wow.
Yeah, and at the pilot that was filmed, I mediated the dispute before I was really a mediator.
Funny.
And they fired me.
That's great.
Yes, it was, but I was shocked at the time, but they hated it. They wanted the clash of opposition.
Yes.
Yes. They wanted to interview the person who felt humiliated because they lost. And so that really taught me how difficult it is to reach people when they are stuck in conflict. And, of course, I've been doing this now this is my 33rd year of mediating. Thank you. And what keeps me in it is the absolute joy of being able to do this work. It's thrilling, and it is a source of personal growth, and Great pleasure to me.
So let me go back just a little bit. How did you find mediation? So you were a judge.
Mm-hmm.
How did mediation, how did you come across it, and how did you decide that that was it?
Well, there were two things that happened. The first was that as a judge, I was assigned to settlements, and I found I was very good at them. So I really loved it, and I enjoyed it much more than I did judging, although I still am an arbitrator, and there's an aspect of that I enjoy as well. But the second was just a little ad in a newspaper for the newly created Neighborhood Justice Center in Los Angeles, advertising an open meeting where they would explain what this was. And I wasn't doing anything that evening and decided to go. And in 5 minutes, I was hooked.
Wow. So what is it about mediation that you love? What keeps you really happy with it?
I think that there are several things. The first is that it is infinitely complex and deep and subtle and profound. As deep and subtle and profound as human beings are, and the places inside of us that organize our responses to conflict. The second is there is an enormous transformational potential that arises when people have honest conversations about their problems. We can now define a transformation as a change in the form of the conflict. And what happens is, as soon as you change the form of the conversation, you also change the form of the relationship. And new conversations become possible. And the third is that mediation, more than anything else that I've ever done, asks me to become a better human being, to become a better person. And so I can see that what I do with other people, I need to be able to do in my own life as well. So those are just a few of the things. But more recently, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I agree with you about how it transforms us as mediators. I thought that was a secret that we all kept, though. So other people didn't know that. No,
did
that's
I
great.
blow it?
I guess so. So you were going to add something.
I was just going to say that there's a new thing that keeps me in it, which is something significantly different. And it's a part of the subject of the Dance of Opposites and also the book that I wrote just before that I'm doing the second edition of, which is called Conflict Revolution. And that is basically this. Within conflict resolution, there is an answer to a problem that is facing everyone. And that is, how do we work together when we are different and when we have opposing ideas and experiences? How do we solve our problems in a collaborative way? And this is something that is incredibly important for the future of the entire human race. And yet, it's not that the entire answer is contained within mediation, but one very, very big part of it is contained within mediation, which is a technology for figuring out how to have conversations about our differences, constructive conversations, collaborative conversations. And so I believe that conflict resolution is a fundamental skill, not just for the 21st century, but the 22nd, the 23rd, the 24th. It is the future of the human race. If we're going to be able to live on this planet and not blow each other up or shoot each other, or get into destructive arguments that tear us apart. So I think that we need to not only think about how we work with individual human beings, but how we work on a much, much larger, more significant scale to build conflict resolution capacity around the world.
You know, one of the things I most admire about what you do is that you don't confine yourself just to looking at how to solve small problems. You really are looking for global peace. And you've really moved from the little problems to looking at what brings peace. So let me ask you, what do you think you do that can bring us closest to peace?
Boy, that is a great question, Zena. Because I like it because it focuses on what we're doing. I think that there are, let me give two different answers that move in completely opposite directions. The first is what I think of as the mediation butterfly effect. And those of us who have followed, who follow science know that the butterfly effect is something that is used to describe climate. The basic idea is that climate is so subtle and so interconnected that a tiny, tiny, tiny little change somewhere will produce a massive change somewhere else. So that the flapping of a butterfly's wings in the Amazonian rainforest can produce a tornado in Texas several months later. And this is real. This isn't just mathematics. This is actual hard science. So I think that there's something called the mediation butterfly effect, which is that by working one-on-one with individual people, slowly but surely, each of us every day is building an awareness of the possibility of communicating through our differences. We're building an awareness that and a hope that not just a kind of false hope, but a real expectation that peace will, in fact, be possible. But there is a second part of it, and that is how we think of peace itself. And it's not just the absence of war that defines peace. It is, as Mary Parker Follett, one of the founders of Mediation, described, it's that hard, difficult work of figuring out how to get along with each other.
Right.
So peace isn't always peaceful. In fact, it's supposed to be rough and a little bit uncomfortable and not so easy to do. So if we just think of it as everybody being eternally blissful, that won't be very helpful. So the other piece that we have to build in is the expectation, and not just, I should say, not just among mediators, but among people generally, the realization that when there's someone who disagrees with you, that person actually knows something that could improve whatever idea it is that you're disagreeing about.
Wow.
Because that's a huge idea. And
yes.
to be able to do that really takes some work.
It does, and it takes work not just in terms of the dialogue, but the conceptualization of actually accepting that idea that someone who disagrees with me could help me.
Mm-hmm. And then stopping yourself in the middle of the disagreement and saying, wait a minute, what can I learn from this? Is there something in this for me? This is, after all, something that isn't working for somebody, and maybe it isn't working for other people as well. And maybe this person actually has seen something that I have missed. So I like to go back to the Oxford philosopher Isaiah Berlin, who wrote during after World War II in the 50s and 60s and to some extent the 70s. And he basically said that every significant idea that has great support contains something in it. And it may not be the thing that you necessarily like or agree with, but there's something in it that is drawing people to that idea. And the object is to figure out what is the truth of the thing that is being said even if it isn't being said in a way that makes it what that truth is.
So it really makes a peacekeeper or a peacemaker a seeker.
Yes. Well said. Absolutely well said. I think that's completely right.
And then the open mind even opens further.
Mm-hmm. So the one of the difficulties with us as a species is we shut ourselves down, we shut our minds down, certainly, very quickly when we become defensive. The difficulty with judgments, as you discover as a mediator, is that judgments are answers to questions that are actually still open, for which there is no fixed answer. Who is this person? Well, you can say, who are they being right now? How are they behaving? But to say who they actually are in some final sense, that's what a judgment is. But that makes it, that freezes it and prevents it from growing or changing or evolving or adapting. It gives up on the possibility of learning. Mm-hmm. So I think of conflict resolution and peacemaking as essentially about learning about ourselves, learning about other people, learning about differences. And that happens in the most powerful ways through our conflicts. Because, of course, when we hear opinions that we agree with, there isn't a great deal of learning that's taking place. We just get reinforcement. But when we talk to someone we disagree with, then we begin to have to think in slightly different ways. Even if we come up with something that sort of reinforces what we believed in, at least we've come to terms with some new idea, some new way of thinking.
And I know that you have really carried that thought, that approach around the world, that you've done work in Cuba, in Greece, in Belfast. What have you done there?
Well, I've worked in about 20 different countries over the last 30 years, ranging from Armenia and Azerbaijan and Georgians and Russians and Ukrainians and Russians and Pakistanis and Indians and all kinds of things. So it's been different in every country, but the basic idea in all the countries has been the same, which is figure out how to work together and confront their issues in a collaborative way. So right now in Athens, where I will be going in April, and with a team of people who have been working there with Mediators Beyond Borders and the Hellenic Mediation and Arbitration Center, what we are doing is training Greek mediators and other interested people in how to facilitate dialogues over issues of immigration, which is a very hot topic in Athens right now because it's the main place where immigrants from the Middle East and Africa are trying to enter Europe. And so there's a lot of pressure from the extreme right. There's really a fascist party called Golden Dawn that is actively beating up immigrants in various poor neighborhoods. And so what we've been trying to do is to show people that it is actually possible to sit down together, learn from each other, and address the problems that each group is having. But the question is, how exactly do you do that? And here's one of the ways that I like. The first way comes in the form of a series of questions. Here's the question. Have you ever been in a situation in a neighborhood or a family or a school or a workplace where you came in to a place where people already were and you were the new one the new kid on the block, entering into a new family through in-laws, going to a new school. And what did it feel like as a result of being that person? How did it feel to you? And have you ever been in a situation in a family or a school or a neighborhood or a workplace where you've been there for a while and all of a sudden these new people are coming in and they want to change everything? What does that feel like? And now everybody can start to imagine what it might feel like to be the other one. So everybody's an immigrant and everybody's a citizen whose life is somehow disrupted by immigration. Only we just have thought of it in terms of people from Africa or the Middle East coming into Athens, but we haven't thought about it in terms of our personal lives. But as soon as we do, it becomes possible then to create the real empathy, which is the internal connection between parts of yourself, parts that you are not in touch with as soon as you demonize someone else. So that's an example of
it's a great example. Wow.
A big idea and turn it into a very specific intervention. There are lots and lots of others, like what's your name and what does it mean within your culture? What are the values that come from your cultural experience, that come from your family? What do you believe in? What do you want for your life? Any of those questions ask people to become human to each other. At one point, Joan Goldsmith and I were working in Puerto Rico, and we were asked to help design a meeting between proponents of statehood in the United States, becoming a state in the U.S., and proponents of independence. And the very first thing that we said was, well, we created a design for the first day when people would talk about these issues. And the rule, basic rule that we asked everyone to agree to was no one can use the words independence or statehood. You can you can say anything else you want. But as soon as you use those words, everybody immediately knows who you are, what you represent, and they've got you typecast. But if we can create a little confusion about who you are, if we can first appreciate who you are as a human being before we know how to typecast you, then the stereotype that we've created begins to fall apart.
Boy, that's beautiful. So, well, let me just say in this pause to remind people, that you are listening to the Texas Conflict Coach Blog Talk radio program, and we are talking with Kenneth Cloke about peace and conflict around the world and about the language of conflict. And, just the example that you just gave really brings us into that issue of the language of conflict. And I know that that's something that you have written about in your newest book. And could we begin to talk about how you conceptualize the language of conflict and how people can begin to think in terms of moving from the language of conflict into the language of peace?
Yes, boy, this is a big topic. And it's one that I've been thinking about for a long time because in mediation, of course, we all sit there and listen to people talk about their conflicts. So we have to begin with the idea that everyone experiences conflicts way, way, way below the level of language. No language can actually recount what it feels like to be yelled at, to be insulted. We can try to communicate those things through language, but the actual experience is deeper and more profound. So what happens is that the language that we use in conflict goes through a series of transformations. Where it ends up is with phrases like, you are a whatever, or you should if you weren't so terrible at this, or who cares what you think, or you don't understand anything, or you're totally wrong, or you always, you never, or those types of phrases. So then we can begin to break these phrases down and to see that a common category that we have in conflict resolution, which is the distinction between power and rights and interests, also can be tracked in language. So people in families, in workplaces, in schools, in organizations use power-based language, which consists of phrases like, you must, you shall, you will, because I said so, that's why, those types of phrases. Or they can use phrases that are based on rights, like you should, you ought to, or you have a right to, or you're entitled to, or you're not entitled to, or you're not the boss here. But it's also possible to think about language in terms of interests. That is, phrases like you could, or you might consider, or why is that important to you, or what do you think would happen if you. In other words, they're much more open than the other types of phrases. But more deeply than that, we can begin to see that we can break the language of conflict down into three fundamental parts. First, there is a pronoun, and third, there is a kind of accusation or judgment. So let's take the pronoun. The pronoun is generally you, or he or she, or they. But what you realize is if you use the word you in connection with a problem, the form of that pronoun is that you have just made an accusation. And what do you get when you're accused of something? Well, the answer is it's automatic. You get a counter-accusation and a denial. You are lazy. No, I'm not. And you're, being bossy. The same is true if you use the word they. They are lazy. Well, what is that? That's a stereotype. And what are you going, because you've lumped a group of people together, and what you're going to get at the end of it is prejudgment. But if you use the word it, or I, or we as a pronoun, you get a completely different response.
Interesting.
So if you use the word it, you've described the problem as an object. There's a lot of work here. How should it be divided? Well, that's an object. Nobody has to get defensive about that, and we can start trying to solve the problem. Or if you say I, as in I feel overworked, and I would really like some help, you're going to get a very different kind of response than if you say you are lazy. And the same is true with we. So the second part, which is the verb, we can now distinguish between two different basic categories of verbs. You did or you are. Well, you did is about behavior, and maybe you can change the behavior, and we don't feel quite so defensive if someone says you did something, because you might do something differently. But you are, that's different. That's a judgment. And we feel judged, and we feel like the person doesn't basically like us. This part is fairly simple. The more complicated part came in trying to figure out the accusation part. So the accusation part, it turns out, can be broken down into three pieces. First, there is a kind of indirect negative statement of interests, which is you are lazy. The word lazy is negative. It's indirect because it's not about me, it's about you. But contained within it is an interest, which is I'm working hard here, and I see that you're not helping, and I don't feel that this is fair or the right way of doing things, or that you are respecting my needs. So that would be a way of translating the accusation and turning it into something different by making it a direct positive statement of interests. It's
so
also,
what you're saying is that the
yeah.
language of conflict is quite judgmental and quite accusatory.
Yes, exactly.
But that within it, there are ideas of problem solving and collaboration.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So we can say, just very simply, you are lazy. Instead of that, if you say, can you give me a hand?
Right.
You've completely changed the conversation. You have transformed it or changed the form of the conversation. My favorite example is, and your listeners will probably recognize this, is the words you always and you never.
Yes.
Yes. So the first question to ask is, when you say you always or you never, what do they say in response? Well, the
Something
answer
defensive
is,
for sure.
Yeah, they say, yes, I do, or no, I don't. And then the second question to ask yourself is this why I decided to, make this statement, to have that response? And the answer is no, of course not. That's not the response that you wanted. So what response did you want? Well, now we see something fundamental that's going on in conflict language, and that is, it's not one statement, you always or you never, it's two statements. Here are the two statements. You are doing this too often for me, or not enough for me. And number two, I'm going to exaggerate how often you do this as a way of getting your attention. Because frankly, I'm getting upset about this, and I've tried to say something about it before, and you haven't listened. So if I just exaggerate it, you'll understand that I'm placing an emotional marker on this communication in order to show you that I'm getting upset and feeling disrespected, and I really want to see you do something about it. The problem is, of course, the other person hears it as a judgment, and therefore they say, oh, no, I don't, or yes, I do. And then they all can also say, well, you do something different.
Right.
So if we think about it, what we're actually doing when we say you always or you never is we are making a false statement about the other person in order to communicate a deeper underlying emotional truth. We're camouflaging a request as a statement of fact. We're exaggerating what really happened. We're stereotyping the other person as unreasonable. We're failing to take responsibility for communicating what it is that we really want or need. We've ignored the other person's needs, et cetera, et cetera. And basically what we end up with is a source of chronic conflict within the relationship. And it's all contained within these two words. You always or you never.
Wow.
Isn't that
well,
amazing?
And you've also identified that there's a wish underlying it that never gets expressed.
Exactly right. And here's one of the types of mediations that I do is I do marital mediations. And here's one that I did a short while ago. The couple comes in, and I met with them the first time, and it was a very good session. And we came in the second time, and I said, well, how have things been? And he says, great, and she says, awful. So I say, okay, well, let's go with awful and see what the issues are. We'll come back to great later. But awful trumps great. So she says, just before, this morning, before coming here, dirty dishes in the sink. And he goes, a big sigh, and he can't believe that she's upset over this. And so you realize that the amount of emotion that is contained within this conflict is not completely apparent when you say he left his dirty dishes in the sink. It's way, way more than just what you would imagine a couple of dirty dishes in a sink would be. So I said, why did that upset you, to her? And she says, well, he's always doing this. And I say to her then, what does it mean to you that he's always doing it? And she says, it means he doesn't respect me. And I say, what does it mean to you that he doesn't respect you? And she says, it means he doesn't love me.
Wow.
And his mouth drops open. He can't believe that she doesn't think that he loves her because he put the dirty dishes in the sink rather than in the dishwasher. But the point of it is, for her, that was the emotional calculus.
Mm-hmm.
And it came out as, he put the dirty dishes in the sink. But underneath it was a fear that he really didn't love her. So how do you get that real conversation? Right? Yeah, isn't that powerful? But doesn't it feel right to you?
Yeah. Yeah, and to unpack that and to look at how to turn that language around.
Yes, exactly. So what you realize is that contained within ordinary conflict communications are, first of all, facts. That is, beginning mediators, we tend to listen mostly for the facts. But in addition to the facts, there are the interpretations and subjective experiences. There are emotions. There are a set of expectations, uncommunicated, even false expectations. There are interests and wishes and fears and family patterns. There are stereotypes of each other and prejudices. There are subconscious meanings and archetypes. There are, requests for acknowledgement.
It can go on and on and on. Yes.
It goes on and on. Well, and the question is, how much are we really listening for?
Right, right. Well, if you were going to make a suggestion to our listeners about them beginning to change either their language or their response to other people's language, what would you suggest?
I would suggest a single question to your partner or the person that you are having difficulty with as a starting point for a real conversation. And the question is, you can phrase it in various ways for various circumstances, but simply it is, why do you feel so strongly or so passionately about this? What is it that is really upsetting you so much about this? Why do you want that so deeply? Mm-hmm. And that's a respectful invitation into an intimate problem-solving conversation. Because the other person feels that you have to be sincere about it. You have to actually want to know what's really going on.
Yeah. And it really changes the direction of the conversation. Instead of the ping-pong ball, you've really started to go deep instead of just sending it back to the other person.
Yeah, exactly. And the second part of it is, this is a little bit more difficult to do. But when they say something that comes from a place of anger or defensiveness or simply, frustration at not having been heard over and over and over again or not having been gotten, to try to listen at a deeper level to what is being said beneath the level of the words, beneath the specific words that are being used. So my favorite example of this comes from a school conflict that I mediated many years ago, where it was between two girls who had a conflict in the school, and one of them had told the other one something in confidence, and the other one had repeated it all over the school. And when I said to her, how did that feel to you? And she said, well, I was upset. Well, when I go inside myself, when I use my own empathy to try to figure out how I would feel under those circumstances, upset isn't the word I come up with.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So what most people will say is, I felt betrayed.
Yes.
And so I said to her, did you feel betrayed? And she said yes, and it was like a huge release. So what was the release about? Well, the release was a result of the fact that there was a problem using the word betrayed. And the problem is that the word betrayal contains two elements. One is disappointment, and the other is desire. And it was the vulnerability of wanting the relationship with the other person, wanting to be liked and respected, wanting the other person to love you. And it turns out that that's really an enormous element in lots and lots of conflicts. So if she can, once she can say that, the other person can really hear the pain. Upset doesn't communicate pain, but betrayed really does. And now they can begin to talk.
Yeah, so that deep emotion. Well, Ken, I am sorry to say that we're going to have to end. This has just been a pleasure. And I want to let people know that you have a web page, which is www.kennethcloke.com, an email address, kcloke@aol.com, and to thank you so much. This is really a wonderful conversation. So do you have 30 seconds of a final message that you want to leave?
Well, I would just like to say that the audience is really privileged to be listening to Zena and to Patty, two people who have really given such an enormous amount to conflict resolution. And I'm hoping that you are able to, you, the audience, are able to listen to Zena and Patty and really benefit from their experience as well.
It's been a privilege to listen to you, Ken.
Thank you, Zena.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And this is the Texas Conflict Coach Blog Talk radio program.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you've enjoyed the program. You can find over 300 podcasts archived to listen at your own convenience at texasconflictcoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. To learn about upcoming radio programs and resources, sign up for our monthly e-newsletter.